Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with just one other person. This week I am joined by Neal Turluck. Neal is a highly experienced geologist. I've had quite a few geologists on my podcast. Very clever people indeed they are. And he's also the president of S&S Oil and Gas. Neal, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
My name's Neal Turluck. I live in Michigan. I operate 154 wellbores in the state of Indiana within the Illinois Basin. I got a bachelor's and master's degree in geology from Western Michigan University. I got my bachelor's in 2015, and the industry kind of shut down in 2016. I was in Texas for grad school in that time. Didn't have the taste to hang out in the American Southwest, and I ditched and came back to Michigan to finish my master's degree at Western Michigan University. Graduated in 2019, went to the Permian to mudlog, and walked into another huge turndown. So I've tried to develop the greatest education that I can surrounding rocks and get experience in the oil and gas industry through what has been a very chaotic time in the last 10 years.
It has been really, really chaotic. How have you survived in business over the last 10 years?
Tenacity, ignorance. Ignorance is bliss. What you don't know can't hurt you. What you do know, if you choose to suffer, can be painful. And actualizing that the road well traveled only leads to the same place for you and everyone else. And if you want to do something different, you have to walk down your own path, regardless of consequences, because the rewards are supposed to be so much greater.
Do you think they are, though? Do you think
I
it's...
don't know. I'll let you know when it's super lucrative and life adds up to greater meaning. But the things that I've gotten to experience, the places that I've been, the work that I've been able to do, is far different than what it would be if I had my foot in the corporate world. And I've experienced more in my path than most geologists do, who work the 9 to 5 with, the badge card, name card, and scan in, scan out every day. I've bombed around drilling rigs. I've played with production. I've gotten to do my own thing with my own wells, all of which is a gigantic risk, and you have to be more than calculated about it. And with that, I get my own reward when I'm very successful. And I've had moments of success and I've had moments of failure.
Do you think you learn more from failure than you do from success?
Definitely, yes. At least I hope you do. I self-analyze, I look back, I look forward, and I look at right now. And, being a scientist, we're trained to always calculate. And as a geologist, we're usually hired to diminish risk. And that's the greatest thing about the oil and gas industry is taking chances and diminishing risk. And if you don't learn from your failures, you'll continue to make the same mistakes. And regardless of whatever industry you're in, that doesn't work out for anybody. So I have to put myself on my own short list. I can't fire Neal, but I can fire the parts of me that haven't worked out in the past, trim down my own shortcomings. And the thing about being on your own or doing things independently is you have to have a network to draw from so you can share your failures, which is humbling, and then gain experience from other people who are willing to help you. And that more than anything has been, the where I'm at today is because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants with people who had more experience, who were able to share with me how they've trimmed down their own failures to turn them into their own successes, or I share my failures and then we brainstorm about how things go better next time. And that's how I've learned the most about my mistakes is picking up the phone, sending an email and saying, "Hey, this blew up in my face. How can I do better next time?" And I believe geologists are usually pretty well grounded, are usually relatively humble people. And it's pretty rare not to get a response because a rising tide floats all boats.
I do agree as well with that. But how do you trim down your failures?
The self-exploration, if I'm looking at wireline logs and I think there might be oil here, I'll put together something relatively simple yet comprehensive to give a high level overview of what I think might be a quote unquote oil field or maybe pay behind pipe. If I mess that up on a well, that well might just turn into a dud and have to get plugged, right? So that's a revenue stream that might go away. I've sent stuff like that off to colleagues and said, "Hey, does this make sense? What do you think?" And I expect that to be for free and just some ideas bouncing around the world. Or, the social network I have and professional network I have, I've developed since undergrad, and some of them are operators. And I call the people with more experience. When I don't have the confidence in myself or the confidence in my own decision making, when I feel doubt, the best way that I've found to either make my emotions feel better about a decision I'm trying to make is to reach out to those that have more experience and say, "Hey, I'm about to do X, Y, and Z. Will this add up to be A, B, and C? And if there's something that isn't clear, I'll either take the risk and the chance if it makes sense, or I won't do it."
Okay, so is it important to surround yourself with really good mentors and peers that you can rely on to give feedback and help?
Whether you're in undergrad, grad school, working on a dissertation, anywhere in life, you are who you surround yourself with. In the corporate world, geologists are usually cornered into, one place. You're working on a team, you know, trying to analyze and interpret data sets as a part of a greater group. And then you come together, collectivize your work, and develop the finished product together. And there's always going to be, a few hangers around, the people who don't carry as much as the others. And it is all working together, whether you're employed with your W-2 9 to 5 every day, or I do mostly sometimes 8, mostly 10 hours. And when I'm in the field, I'm 10 to 14-hour days. So you have to have as good or better around you to grow, learn, adapt, and achieve.
I agree with that as well. That is a very good insight. So, what is the most important lesson that a mentor or peer has taught you?
Don't give up. Always try forward. Hang on to the last drop. There's been times I've wanted to run away screaming with my hair on fire, and I don't because of people who have probably been in my place, in my space, in my shoes. And will it all be okay? Probably not. Will it all work out? Probably at some time. But I get to experience the full range of emotions between joy and absolute pain. But that's the joy of life, right? And the existentialist view that I have, I should experience the greatests and the worsts because not all of life is rainbows and Skittles. And I talked to a operator in Michigan who's a multi-generational operator. And I was in his office, and there's a entire file cabinet that says litigation on it that was taller than I was. So no matter what walk of life you're in or the experience you have, nothing is going to work out as you want it to. It's going to play out as it does. And that's why you have to be adaptable.
Yeah,
So tenacity and determination, whether it's blind faith, self-confidence, or God's plan, not giving up and chasing after the eternal dream.
I agree as well. I do agree with that. But do you, because you've been in business by yourself and you're a very young guy to be in business by yourself, or maybe not, maybe not. Do you ever think about, oh, I should have just maybe settled for the 9 to 5?
All the time, yeah. There's days where being a business owner and being a geologist, they're not one and the same. And I thought I'd be able to do a lot more geology, owning a bunch of oil wells. And I'm a business owner. The targets, the projects, the plans are all processed through the geological concepts I have and my knowledge about rocks. But I went to the SEG symposium conference in 2018, and there's a group called Polarcus that goes around the world and does offshore seismic. And I've been competitively racing sailboats my entire life. And I've had multiple people tell me in undergrad and grad school, combine your passion. And that was one way to do it. And looking back, if there was anything that I would do, offshore seismic processing. And then you get to clock out, right? I don't get to clock out. Owning a business is 24/7. And if you don't eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you'll never have dessert. And dessert's going to be as big as you want it to be, depending upon how you work and how hard you work. So you get to have dessert when you have a 9 to 5 because if you don't meet the expectations of your employer, you won't have a job. But at the end of the day, if you have a work phone, you can turn it off sometimes. I cannot. And that's a luxury that I never really knew existed, and that some people probably don't have the concept of because they've never owned their own business and done their own thing. And that's where I say ignorance is bliss.
But do you really think that ignorance is bliss?
Yeah, for sure. Because I've been ignorant to my circumstances. And not that I was that naive or hopeful or gullible, I think, but I always used to joke when I'm oil rich, I'm going to light $50 cigars with $20 bills and laugh at the world. No one has that experience. And it's just what you see on TV and movies. My dad was a chemist. My mom's a writer. And my experience in the oil and gas industry before I started studying geology was seeing pump jacks around Michigan and wondering why there's oil in the ground. So it's a wonderful concept. The science behind it is beautiful. And the love of rocks that I see in people when I go to like rock and mineral shows, I look at a rock and I'll interpret it and analyze it and try to come up with my best scientific conclusion, where people look at a rock and say, oh, that's pretty, and they love it. I love it all the same too, but I think about it too much. And that's why I say ignorance is bliss, because I will make my own headaches for myself.
Okay, that's an interesting concept. That It is. It's a bold statement as well, I think. So, what is the most challenging thing that you have that you find about your career path just now?
So when I was looking into what a career could be for Neal, I, the oil and gas industry stood out because I thought I could live and work in Michigan and have a long, lucrative career. Um, and I, my dad was essentially an engineer. So, my concept of everything was backed by an engineering mindset. And I should have maybe studied reservoir engineering. Instead, I studied geology. And in doing so, I've been able to combine kind of both of, you know, I am not an engineer in any way, but I've thumbed through a few chapters. So in looking at all that, I've tried my best to calculate what the world would look like if I could pull the trigger on all things. But being, the jack of all trades, but the master of none doesn't really work out well, which is why I targeted, focused, and materialized my education on sedimentary rocks and the petroleum system. And in grad school, one of my professors had us do a provenance study, or the origination of sedimentary particles, where they came from and how they got there, with a focus on where they came from. And when you start looking at basin dynamics with a sense of how did this little sand particle get from A to Z, it answers a lot of internal questions or allows for the thought processes to occur to come to the conclusion of why is there oil here?
Okay. But that's even just a fascinating subject as well, because obviously I did electrical engineering at uni, so we never really got the chance to look at how oil is formed. But
Yeah.
it is quite a specialised and interesting subject in its own.
Yeah, when I was at that SEG conference in 2018, it was a recruitment event for ExxonMobil through the Society of Exploration Geophysicists. There was one other geologist in the room. Everyone else was primarily getting a master's degree in geophysics, physics, or math, or a doctorate in, the physics type stuff. And there was a stratigraphic chart, and to me, I was reading a book. To them, they were staring at a piece of artwork. It it was just simple to me, but to them, some of them had never really studied rocks. And that was pretty surprising to me. But when you're looking at waves and optics and you're doing engineering, there is a lot of work that goes into that too. But you're studying the nuances of what's within the rock, or trying to understand sines and waves. And that has its own merit. And that's why, like in the corporate world, you kind of get cornered into your area of expertise, because if you're sitting there churning and burning through waves and optics and seismic work or geophysical logs, it helps to know what the rock is, but then that work gets turned over to someone who knows what the rock is, who doesn't know sine waves, optics, and all the intimate different electrical engineering or physics responses to the rocks.
Okay, so do you think it's better to concentrate on specializing in one area of your discipline rather than be covering everything?
Oh yeah, definitely. I've, the the people who ask me questions or come to me for advice, I always tell them, get out your bow and arrow and hit the target, focus, concentrate, study. I put all my heart into the petroleum system, structural geology, and sedimentary rocks, sedimentology. And in doing so, I'm pretty decent at analyzing, interpreting basin dynamics and sedimentary cycling in the rock record. And that allows me to do some exploration. And in the time in owning what I've owned, it's also allowed me to understand pay horizons, potential oil fields, and things of that nature. So I kind of studied what I wanted to do and I'm doing it. But if you're going off to 9 to 5 corporate world, you need to be a subject matter expert. Otherwise, you won't get hired because you're going to get interviewed by probably initially an HR person and then some people who are experts in their field afterwards. And if you can't sit there and be conversational about what you're going to work in, you probably won't get hired.
Yeah, I agree. So, what tips would you give to the younger listeners on how to prepare for interviews?
Be genuine and authentic. No one's perfect. The people who are interviewing you or you'll be working with have made all of the mistakes, even me as an employer and me as an employee. We all know we're going to fail at some point, and what we will do will either work out or it won't. And that's why I say diminishing your mistakes and learning from them is extremely important. So you build, grow, and create a better version of yourself day by day. And be humble, not arrogant, especially when you're in the process of, because you're selling yourself, right? You're creating the best version of yourself and putting it forward, and that has to come with humility and also a sense of self-worth so that when they go back to their team and come together and try to choose who they want to work with, that person is you. So admitting some mistakes, admitting some of your own failures, and remaining teachable has to be portrayed along with the success you've had along the way, whether it be educational in college or through your applied work in the workforce.
Yeah, I agree as well. Yes, totally. So, is there anything that you still want to achieve in your career?
Shoot for the moon, right? If you miss, you'll land among the stars. I always had an eye for the Gulf of Mexico, and I would love to drill a well offshore Gulf of Mexico. I don't know if it'll be with S&S Oil and Gas. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but offshore drilling and offshore work, just given my love for the sea, that would be pretty cool. And going out and having a gigantic seismic gathering process, acquiring seismic data and developing an oil field from exploration to tertiary recovery over 30 years and have it produce millions of barrels. That would be pretty cool. But I don't know if I want to work that hard necessarily because Neal would not be able to do that all on his own. It would create, I would have to create a corporation, and that would probably take hundreds of millions of dollars. So, in a decade, we can revisit that. With what I'm doing right now, and the focuses that I have on today and the future, onshore, mature oil fields, infill drilling, and taking that engineering mindset to my geological education, I think provides the most realistic path forward for the rest of my life. And I don't want to sell myself short and say I'm not going to be able to put together a Gulf of Mexico exploration program. But yeah, if there's anything, if someone handed me the golden ticket, that would be pretty cool.
I think it would be as well.
Yeah.
So, what are you working on just now? What does the what does the future hold for Neil?
Big things developing Indiana. Being an oil man in the Midwest ain't easy. Attracting funding, attracting money, bringing in people. Everyone's attracted to the shale plays of the contiguous 48. It's a lot, it's different, right? I'm going to say it's a lot easier. Is it easier? The return's better, right? The margins are greater. The reservoir engineering is slightly more simple. There's, this was explained to me the other day. It's more petrophysics and engineering, finding, overpressured zones, higher pore pressure, and then essentially you're just calculating out a tablet, a brick, and not making a quote unquote blanket statement, but saying, your estimated ultimate recoveries in this area of volume is going to create X amount of oil and gas is a lot simpler than working in a irregular sandstone or limestone body in the conventional world, conventional production world. So, it's something I've stayed away from because not that shale's boring, but the geology work involved with working in the shale plays versus conventional oil and gas reservoirs. I find the conventional to be a lot more fun. And that's why I focused in the Illinois basin in Southwest Indiana is water flooding, horizontal drilling, trying to find uh, bypass pay where drillers didn't complete in certain horizons that if that was their target and focus, it would be an uneconomic well. And now that the well's there, you can just break the well open, perf it to increase your barrels per day from that well. And if I can target, focus, and concentrate well by well basis with scale and lower operating costs, it's relatively lucrative, even if I only make an extra 2 barrels a day per well, because of being an independent and doing a lot of work myself. So, my big focus is presently what I own, making it as good as it can be, and trying to find the longevity necessary to stay in business and to build my own resume and create my own next venture. And right now, there really isn't anything on the horizon for the next venture. At some point, I'd like to operate in Michigan. Whether that happens or not, I've come to accept and know. I've always focused on a yes, but the Michigan basin and operating in Michigan is a little more difficult. The regulatory environment is as good as it can be for what exists here. We do have some of the greatest freshwater reserves on the earth, so the government's done their best to protect that, which is great with me. We all need to drink water, so I don't want it to be trashed, but it also increases operating expenses and in stripper well production or in working in aged reservoirs, it makes it difficult when operating costs are higher. So that's my big holdback in Michigan. It's just a tough basin to work in. The Michigan basin is mature, much like the Illinois basin is mature, but there's less pay horizons. There's been a lot of majors who have come into Michigan in the last 50 years, and they've found a lot of oil, and there's still a lot of oil left. So the back of my mind, and at times on the weekends, I click around on well files in Michigan and think about the future. So, yeah.
I think that's really excellent advice as well. Do you think that the operating costs will get more expensive further down?
Oh my God, yeah. 15 years old or 48 years old, nothing gets easier. And that's why I say adapt to being life, because when everything's beautiful and new, when you're young, it just becomes less beautiful in time. If you live in the Grand Canyon and that's your backyard, you're like, oh, okay, cool, hole in the ground. It Nothing in life through time is as good as you want it to be. And in the oil and gas world, the old timers that punched holes in the ground, that found all the geysers blasting out of the earth, and every single gusher that came in was one less virgin oil and gas reservoir. And I haven't heard of a oil and gas well blowout onshore contiguous United States that made more than 1,000 barrels a day in a very long time. So when you can't find reservoirs like that, and you've got the history of those issues and the environmental problems that they create, operating costs are only going to increase because no one wants to have oil on the ground in their backyard, and no one wants to have carcinogenic molecules in their drinking water from aged infrastructure. And everyone's becoming more cognizant the environmental issues that come with exploration and production for oil and gas. So whether it be mining, it's with geology, you become an environmentalist, whether you plan to or not. But mining, oil and gas, all the exploitative natures that come with it, there's also the science of environmental remediation that comes too with the study of geology. And when you have that all-encompassing view of the earth, the systems, and what supports human life, you begin to actualize that it all costs money, some of which you don't get a return. And that in turn plays into the operating costs, because that's what the most expensive part is making sure you're doing it prudently. Because if you're not prudently producing, whether it's metals or hydrocarbons, your operating costs are going to increase a lot more, especially when you're making messes. In the society we have, in the society that's building and growing, you can't make messes anymore, and your mistakes have to be fewer. And the mistakes that you make will be more costly. Because when you have to go clean it up, there are more eyes. And with more eyes, there's more money. So whatever it is across the board, wherever you are, it is all going to get more expensive.
I agree. I think it's going to get more expensive due to the fact it's going to be harder to drill, I think, going down further down the line due to the fact that a lot of countries are wanting to implement the net zero.
Yeah, yeah, that's a big thing in Europe. We have a new administration. I hope for myself, net zero stuff kind of diminishes in the United States. I in undergrad and grad school, I always talked about having a large carbon footprint because I wanted to make oil and gas. I don't really see the CO2 molecule being as detrimental to our existence as other people do. I'll give, the beyond the benefit of the doubt to those that say methane is destroying the atmosphere. it probably could be degrading the ozone layer more so than if whatever methane we're bringing out didn't exist. But to me, it's all relatively negligible. There's a lot of Earth systems that contribute as much or more than what the oil and gas industry contributes.
I think so too, actually. I do think so too. So, I'm going to ask you maybe one final question. If you could turn back time, would you change anything? Would you settle for a 95?
If I could turn back time, man, Cher is blaring through my brain right now. Yeah, I'd change some things. I think that people that say they wouldn't are too ignorant. I've made some pretty large moves and some relatively bold decisions, whether it was out of calculation or ignorance. I'll be able to know in 5 to 10 years when things play out either in my favor or against me. It is what it is. You know, I like what I acquired. I enjoy the business that I own. Um, there's some stuff that was outside of my control that, in studying geology, with a focus of working in energy and oil and gas, the timing, there's nothing I could do about it. 2016, the bottom dropped out. I was in Odessa, Texas in February, watching the price of crude oil plummet, having put out an ungodly amount of resumes, emails, applications to internships or field positions for the summer, and nothing materializing. So it was either live starving in an oil field town or go back to Michigan. If I would have stayed in Odessa and stuck it out, I might have been rail thin but well experienced. Was that potential possible? Maybe, but what would my quality of life be? So where would I be today as a professional if I would have stayed in Odessa? That's sometimes something I ask myself. But also the experiences that I had in coming back to Michigan and finishing grad school up here, I wouldn't trade for the world. I've gotten to do more things in my free time than I would have been able to do if I were in West Texas, a lifestyle that I enjoy. So, the focus of my life has been in trying to balance the passions and hobbies with my professional passions. And if I focused more on my professional life and always sacrificed with the greatest of discipline, would I be somewhere else? Would I have that, corner office in Houston? Or would I still be trying to do the same thing? And you can't answer those questions because it's not the experience and that's not how life added up. But to think about it and to analyze and interpret my actions, patterns, and behaviors as to where it got me to today, I wouldn't change a whole lot. Think big, act big, fall big, but also have big success. And stumbling around with that mindset is how people like Harold Hamm existed. They got to where they are today because they failed less. And that's learning from your mistakes more and surrounding yourself with good people. And I find myself, as I stand today, with the capacity to be able to do what I want in the future because I look at the past and say, would I change much? Yeah, I'd change some things. And I think the biggest change I would make is having some smaller moves and assuming less risk. But you can really only do that in hindsight. So it's tough. It's tough to say. That's why a lot of the time I just focus on today and keep my eyes on the next day. And if anything, you know, that's me learning from my past, is focus on today. All we have is the next morning. And if you can do the best with what you have in the time that you're available, do it. Just do it. uh, yeah, I guess I wouldn't change much, but in hindsight, making some smaller, more targeted risks, but then you wouldn't think big, act big, and have big success. So that's a really, really tough question to answer.
I think you answered it amazingly, actually.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, that's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Neal for your time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening, and see you next week. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts, and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.